current and future health of the automotive industry and its implications for the U.S. economy at large is the topic of my conversation today. Let me introduce our panelists who will be speaking today. We'll be hearing from Tom Vaughn. He is a member of the Corporate Finance Group and co-leader of the M&A Practice Group with Dykema. Tom, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
And Laura Bacchus. She is a member of the Automotive Industry Team and a leader in the supply chain group of Dykema. Hello, Laura.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me.
And Tim Mraz. He is Vice President of The Right Place. Hi, Tim.
Hi. Thanks for the invite to be part of this today.
So that's our panel for today. Let me start by directing a question to Tom, and that is a general question that speaks to the key findings of a survey that you folks did. You were analyzing automaker and supplier perspectives on the U.S. economy and the auto industry in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. What are some of the key findings of that survey that relate to the current and future health of the automotive industry?
Okay, yeah, that's great. And just a little bit by way of background, we also did an M&A survey at about the same time as we did the auto survey. And so we're going to do some comparisons to that survey during the discussion today.
Great.
And then we also took our survey, the auto survey, and we broke our respondents into two groups. We have all respondents, and then we also took the respondents from companies that are really involved in the auto industry, manufacturers, suppliers, those types of companies, and have auto-only responses as opposed to responses from people like me who are professionals who practice in the industry. So sometimes you're going to hear us talk about the auto respondents and what their views were with respect to it, because they differed in some of the areas from the views of all of the respondents. So
great. So there's a number of ways to slice and dice it then, for sure. So
there's a number of ways to slice and dice it, and it always makes the information very, very interesting in the process.
Okay, Tom, well, let's sum up for me just some of the high points of that survey. What did you learn from this?
Yeah, so one of the questions we asked our respondents were about the rate of new supply chain orders in the automotive business as impacted by COVID-19. And so we asked respondents what they saw in terms of the rate of new orders in the next 6 months. And that was pretty much with the auto respondents, 45% of the auto respondents expected a decline over the course of the next 6 months, whereas about 38% overall of our respondents felt like there would be a decline.
Now, when were they being surveyed exactly?
So what would be the rate of new supply chain orders over the next 6 months?
Starting at what point, though? I mean, when were they?
At July 1st.
July 1st. Okay, so essentially the rest of this year, rest of this calendar year.
Through the rest of this
okay,
calendar
go ahead.
year.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure we knew what we're talking about the next 6 months. But
yeah,
continue.
So 45% of the auto respondents expected a decline. When we asked the question about the next 12 months, that shifted with 46% of the auto respondents expecting an increase in the rate of new orders, compared to the prior 12-month period. And when we jumped out, looking out 24 months, the auto respondents, 71% of them expected to see an increase. So what we took away from this in looking at the survey results was really a view that in the short term, the auto industry and the suppliers need to get through the short term here. It's going to be a tough next 6 to 12 months, but if they can get through to the other end, the expectation is, the industry is going to be back and chugging along.
Wow,
I mean,
interesting.
All the industries materials we see, I think everybody expects the next couple of years to be slower growth than we have seen in the past, but still hopefully some growth. And I think our respondents felt the same way.
But interesting that one of our largest, most vibrant industries has such essentially a sense of optimism, compared with what some people are saying, thinking that some economists saying it may take 5 years for our economy to recover. And here is the automotive industry telling us that they may at least start that a lot earlier. However, there are shorter term implications, and a number of these automakers have suspended operations, have they not, Laura, initially? And what's going on there and with regard to reopening?
So if you remember back in March, the auto industry abruptly had to shut down. This is something never seen before in the industry. Those of us who work with the industry from a legal perspective, which I do on a supply chain, understand and appreciate that the shutting down of any supplier from a tier 3 all the way up to the OEM is a big deal. So when everything shut down, it was a game changer. But what happened was that first of all, if you can see from our results, 84%, almost everybody had to shut down. It was almost everyone in the industry. But what happened after that is that the industry continued to work together and have, a great amount of free flow communication during the months, March, April, May, and they had to. Each state had differing orders on who could be an essential worker, who could be open and not be open. Then, of course, this is a global supply chain. You've got Mexico, which had its own orders, and then you've got a long supply chains where it's reaching out to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
What that resulted in is that the reopening actually went much smoother than perhaps people had anticipated. And that's really to the testament of the planning in the auto industry. So while 84% of our auto respondents said they had to shut down in the pandemic, only 20% responded that after they reopened, they had to shut down again. And that's an impressive number.
So once they opened, they stayed open, basically, or a good.
For the most part. There are some widely publicized incidents where there may have been, a case of where someone tested positive, they just shut down for cleaning, but for the most part, it has gone quite smoothly.
You make a good point, Laura, that we should probably not be thinking of this automotive industry that we're calling as a monolithic thing where everybody is in lockstep and doing exactly the same thing regardless of where they are. Tim, I'm wondering, there in West Michigan that you specialize in, you promote West Michigan. How is that reflected specifically in your area? What were you seeing in terms of auto manufacturing there?
One of the things that we're really proud of here in West Michigan, I would even say in the state, is the latest numbers we've been seeing coming out from the state of Michigan is that the state as a whole, in terms of the automotive industry, has been able to come back pretty strong. Mm-hmm. The automotive manufacturers that we're meeting with here in the region, I think many of them are seeing opportunity in the chaos. But really, the two big hurdles for our employers coming out of this are dealing with workforce issues. And two, dealing with continued supply chain management issues. I think this is, to Laura's point, I think a lot of this, the shutdown and the global supply chain has really redefined the word redundancy when it comes to supply chain management. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our companies having to deal with that, just because my supply chain manufacturer is open in West Michigan doesn't mean that my supplier in Arizona is open and to be able to get parts for production. On the other side of that, with workforce issues, we had workforce issues going into this, into the COVID crisis. Coming out of it, it's going to make it, just that much harder.
Very interesting point you make about supply there. Of course, the automotive industry was one of the pioneers of the just-in-time supply model, where you keep very little inventory, you rush stuff to the production line the moment you need it, and you don't have a lot of extra stuff sitting around. Now, a lot of companies are saying, we need some buffer stock. We need to, if not scrap the JIT concept, at least revise it. Laura, that's a supply chain story right there. Are you seeing some modification of a just-in-time theory of production?
At this point, we're not seeing a wholesale modification of the just-in-time. It's worked remarkably well in lean manufacturing for decades. But what we are seeing is some reevaluation of long supply chains, meaning your suppliers in China, and with possible pandemics in the future, with differing times where companies might shut down and inability to get stock and parts that are timely. Just a reevaluation of risk and benefit. Is the money that you might potentially save worth the risk and not being able to get the parts in time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tom, I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the M&A thing. I know maybe we're going to save that for the end, but I'm also wondering in terms of short term, is it too early to already start to see patterns of mergers and acquisitions? Are companies moving that quickly in response to the situation, or are they kind of holding their fire and thinking of M&A as more of a long-term strategy in response to what's going on?
So I'd answer that question in two ways. First off, from a seller's perspective, I think we're seeing a little bit of dichotomy here. Any seller who believes that they've got a strong company and that they can make it through the current COVID crisis is sitting on the sidelines. They're not going to put the company out there because valuations are down. I mean, all of the statistics and our respondents showed that valuations are down by at least 20%, and that's very consistent with statistics I'm seeing. So strong sellers are staying on the sidelines. But we are also seeing M&A activity, and including the auto industry, of people that were not as financially strong. People that have some financial weakness are going out and looking for partners or are looking for an opportunity to shore up their financial, wherewithal.
Hmm.
So from that perspective, I think there are some good buying opportunities out there, and we're seeing, PE funds and other companies get into the market looking for opportunities to pick up on good values, at this point in time.
Yeah. Tim, I want to get back to you just for a moment about the regional aspect of it, because I'm sure you hate this phrase that you've had to bear for decades, the Rust Belt, referring to the industrial Northeast, and supposedly everything has moved to the South, the Southeast, Southwest. I'm sure you would counter that argument as a promoter of West Michigan, but do you in fact see different patterns, shifting patterns within the United States? I want to talk about international a moment, but in terms of where cars and trucks are being produced right now in the U.S., do we see shifting patterns regionally?
I can only speak, like you said, for West Michigan. And, one of the things that, I'm proud to say is in terms of our projects, through the right place, we have continued to set 5 record years of economic growth here, much of which has been in the manufacturing sector. So for all those folks that, one, to your point, have said, the Midwest is dead, manufacturing is dead, we need to move to the coast and we need to move south. We have countless projects that prove otherwise. So,
Mhm.
the economy in West Michigan continues to remain strong. One of the great things we have going for us in West Michigan is we are a diverse economy. So many of our automotive suppliers also are suppliers to other industries as well. So you have that diversification mix that you don't have in other communities.
Laura, could you talk about some of the international supply chain implications? I know that a lot of tier one suppliers and the like surround the OEMs within this country, but I'm wondering to what extent have US automakers or automakers making autos in the US, to what extent have they had to depend on long supply lines for parts? To what extent have they had to depend on China and other countries like that? And is that changing now with the realization that there's so much more risk attending that type of a strategy?
So, of course, the auto chain is interrelated globally. Every single OEM, every single tier one has long supply chains,
Hmm.
whether, Mexico, which would be the shortest, all the way to Asia, throughout Europe. And that's being reevaluated to the extent that there are additional costs that weren't there before. That you're having the cost for your facility with the additional PPE. But now, if there's a small pandemic in another foreign country, that might shut down. Then when it finally reopens, you're going to have expedited freight and other costs that you just didn't have before. So that's why it's being relooked at. And
Hmm.
to the same extent, in the international and the US supply chain, we see the OEMs and the tier ones looking very much at their supply chains to make sure they're healthy. The visibility has always been there, but they're dramatically at this point making sure they're on top of everything, because anyone in the supply chain goes down, it's going to impact the smooth reopening that we've had.
Are we seeing any kind of a move to reshoring of anything that was produced overseas that is now coming back to the United States and being manufactured here? Or are those patterns pretty much the same as far as you can see for now?
From what I can see, and again, it's the legal perspective, so we might get it at the back end.
Hmm.
Uh, it's much too soon. At this point, the focus is reopening the supply chains that exist. And with the automotive industry, every single part down to the smallest widget has to go through extensive testing, particularly safety parts. And that's where the focus is reopening the supply chain. And now that it's opening, making sure that it's running smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just support Laura on that one. I think every supplier and OEM is, constantly evaluating and reevaluating their supply chain, and they certainly are doing that right now. But the way that the auto industry works, nothing can be done that quickly. So the
Hmm.
changes, if they're going to come, are going to come in the future, not here in the short term, would be my perspective.
Yeah. Tom, I want to speak to your expertise in corporate finance too, because there has been a lot of concern even before the pandemic about access to capital and finance problems. And well, we had low interest rates, which is great, but everything else has been difficult in terms of worry about corporate debt and the like. How is the automotive industry approaching the corporate finance question right now? Are they a little bit nervous about what's going on? And do they have the funds and the working capital to move forward with the types of investments they need to make?
Yeah, a couple different things. The one thing is that the auto industry was in a completely different mode today than they were back in the big recession from 10 years ago. There,
Mhm.
they were not financially prepared for a downturn. They were this time. They were expecting a downturn to some extent, not quite as extensive as we had, but they were prepared for it. So most auto suppliers and the OEMs financially were well prepared for this and well prepared to weather the current storm. And I think we've seen that with their limited layoffs and ability to really maintain operations and activities. And of course, a lot of suppliers borrowed down on their lines of credit, just at the start of the pandemic. So most people are sitting there with pretty good cash.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody is out. Right, I shouldn't say out not looking for new money, but I think everybody knows new money coming today is going to be expensive. So trying to live off of what they have is where they're at. But we also know there's lots of activity out there, lots of pipes being done where people are bringing in some equity to shore up the balance sheet, a little bit at this point in time. I think lenders are still being pretty cautious, so probably the debt market's a little bit tougher than it has been, with the equity market maybe a little bit
Mhm.
more of a safety net for people these days.
Okay, so let's broaden this discussion to talk about the extent to which what you've learned, what we've all learned about the automotive industry is a bellwether for the U.S. economy as a whole. Let me just go to you first, Tom, and say, based on your research, is this in fact a good indication of how the larger economy is doing in terms of optimism, pessimism, future investments, and the like? Should we take that as an example?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. We've done the M&A survey for 16 years, and the one thing that we have found is M&A and the U.S. economy move very much hand in hand. So optimism on the economy turns out to be optimism for the M&A market. And we have also found, we did a survey last year, found that survey respondents believe that probably the leading economic indicator is consumer confidence and consumer spending. So when we see positive outlook in our surveys from our respondents, we think that's a good sign for the future. And so
Mhm.
we did ask our respondents about the next 12 months. Will the economy have a positive, neutral, or negative compared to where we're at today? And it was about evenly split over the next 12 months.
Mm.
Interestingly, though, when we went out to 24 months, that changed pretty dramatically, with 46% of the auto respondents having a positive outlook and 76% of the M&A respondents having a positive outlook, which was really pretty bullish 24 months out. So I would say that the outlook, at least from our survey, on a longer term basis, is a very positive outlook and a positive for the recovery.
Great. And Laura, let me just ask you if to the extent to which you think the auto manufacturing industry might be transformed permanently as a result of the pandemic, as opposed to just actions that are taken right now in order to survive with this current situation.
I think you touched on some of the things earlier in your questions. There will be an evaluation of long supply chains,
Mhm.
whether it makes sense to bring things onshore or at least back into North America to some extent. There's going to be, looking very closely at suppliers to ensure that they are viable and can be viable and can withstand a shutdown for 3 months, which is not something that had to be looked at before.
Yeah.
Another question in our minds, and this is for the future, is will buying habits change and how will they change to the extent people are working remotely? Maybe families will only need one car or two instead of several. These are some of the questions we don't know, but people are certainly looking at them.
And Tim, let me just get a quick comment from you to wrap up. Optimism in the upper Midwest, West Michigan, the heart of the traditional automotive industry in America. I mean, do you get a feeling that they feel the same way as Tom and Laura are talking about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked, the three of us talked about, previously was, the idea that, as goes the auto industry, so goes Michigan.
Hmm.
I think folks don't realize the amount of industry that is attached, even indirectly, to the automotive industry. Us in economic development, we look at things like job multipliers, and the job multiplier in the automotive industry is 4 to 6, sometimes even 8x. And so, even though you may be thinking about automotive direct jobs, you need to talk about other industries that are supportive of the auto industry, and how much of our overall economy is supported by the auto industry.
Mhm.
And so seeing these numbers come back that we saw in the survey, that there is a long-term optimism, I think is reassuring.
Some really interesting insights into the state of the automotive industry and its implications for the U.S. economy at large. Tom Vaughn of Dykema, Laura Bacchus of Dykema, Tim Mraz of The Right Place. Thanks to all of you for participating today. I really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Robert. Enjoyed it.